Hello? Yeah, coming through now? All right. Yep. Mhm. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. We're getting started a touch late here. We've had a little bit of technical difficulties getting all these different technical devices to talk to each other so that you guys can hear me. Um, excuse me. We're going to get started today with a word of prayer. So we'll have everybody bow their heads. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, for the sunshine this morning, well, at least here in Ohio. And I thank you for your many, many blessings and the ability to come together as Pathfinder leaders to learn more about how to take care of your young people and to minister to them and to hopefully lead them closer to you. We pray that you will be with us as we go through this meeting. Help us to learn everything you need us to learn and to retain it. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so all right, we're going to get started here. Our first one today is communication theory and practice. Now, when I looked at this title and I started working on pulling together the slideshows, um, there's something interesting there. There's theory and practice. So that kind of lends for me to think there might be something different. Obviously, theory, on the next slide there, the communication theory has four basic elements. There's source, message, channel, and receiver. Now, again, theory is an idea, it's a concept. So, in theory, in concept, this is the simple formula for communication. You have a source, which would be the person trying to relay information. They're going to need communication skills, as you can see there in our little diagram. Uh, Attitudes are going to be something we need to take into consideration because someone may be coming to the conversation with some very heated opinions, and so attitudes is something to consider. You got to also consider the person's knowledge. If I were to come to you and start talking to you about butterflies, you're going to know that most of what I say is going to be stuff I'm coming up with because I really don't know much about butterflies. And then there's the social cultural system. So there is a certain amount of social and cultural influence on a conversation. I do know of someone that they part of their culture and faith is to have more than one spouse. And he currently has a wife, and then he's dating a gal, and the whole thing is just kind of confusing to me because I grew up believing in monogamy. But to talk to him as a friend and to try and I guess understand the mentality behind it is something that's kind of difficult for me to do. So when we look at our source, we need to look at are there social and cultural implications that could affect the conversation. Now there's that little box that says encodes. Now you have to, as the source, be able to put your message out there. So you're going to be using either Morse code, the spoken word, the written word. There's different ways of relaying messages. In worst case scenario, you can actually do the whole emoji um, conversation where it's just pictures. I think it's called a pictogram. I'm not 100% sure, but there are ways to communicate, and that's what the source has to decide is what's the best way to communicate. Obviously, today we're using the spoken word and a little bit of the written word here on the screen. We get into the next one. Next category is message. So that is the actual information you're trying to relay. So what code you're using, we just talked about that. The content. So something that I tell a lot of people, especially new directors, is when you are trying to communicate, you need to use the three C's. Um, com- Complete, clear, and concise. Sorry, I had to think for that for a second. It's coming up again a little bit later, but you need to have clear content. You need to be able to not only have a good point, but you need to relay that point, that message. So that's part of the coding. Treatment. You're looking at, excuse me, the way that you present the information. And then there's elements and structure. Like we talked about last night with developing a good or an effective worship is you need to look at other elements in the structure of your presentation. So when I go through and I do a slideshow presentation like this, where we're on PowerPoint, I do pictures and I make sure the information is relevant and flows smoothly. And I really have to be mindful of my elements and my structure. So the more media you involve, the more elements and structure you have to focus on. Sorry, my voice is a little off today. A little more off than yesterday, I should say. So then we go into channel. So now you're looking at which senses are you trying to work with. Is this a visual thing where, like right now, you guys can see me up on the screen. You guys can see the presentation on another screen. Hearing, are you able to hear me? That was one of the issues we had to start this morning. Was we just weren't getting the sound through. And my guess is Zoom meeting is probably not the best for lip reading. Plus, I have a mustache and a beard, so that makes lip reading even harder. Then there's touching. Is there some part of your presentation where there is hands on? Then there's smelling and tasting, kind of goes in with the hands on. Um, you're going to want to look at in a communications, you're not going to want to try and hold a conversation in a garbage dump because, frankly, the smell is going to be very distracting. So that's kind of an odd analogy, but I've been to garbage dumps. I've had to communicate with people that are there with me and relay information. And um, so that oddly enough, that is something we have to take into consideration is our five senses. How is this going to affect um, the effectiveness of our communication? Then we go to the next little box, which is decodes. So now that's the receiver's portion of it. You're hearing this, and you now have to take it from whatever media is being used to relay the message, and you now have to put it into your brain as something you understand. So we go back to, communication skills. There are communication skills for the listener to use. There's active listening skills. And like I said, communication is a topic that we can go for a really long time on, but I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to try and keep it short and concise. Um, so we're going to look at communication skills. Then there's attitude. I'm sorry, that was bad. Um, I burned the roof of my mouth yesterday and starting to slough off, and that was bad. So there's attitudes. If the person that is receiving has a predetermined issue, they don't like the person that's relaying the message, they have no respect for them. There are a couple of different things that could affect how they hear the information. You also have to consider your listeners' knowledge. You may know a lot about butterflies, but if you start talking to me about butterflies, you're going to very quickly find that what you're saying is going way over my head. And then again, back to the social and cultural systems. When this guy I know was talking to me about his culture, he has to realize that I come from a very American Christian culture. And so what he's saying is not going to really ring with me, or he's going to have to do more explaining for me. So, in theory, this is a nice idea about communication. And we all know that communication falling apart is one of the biggest causes for many disagreements, and miscommunication can actually lead to massive life changing issues such as divorce. So we need to be mindful of how we're interacting with the people around us, especially those closest to us. So let's go to the next slide, and we're going to talk a bit about the different types of communication that we're going to be working with as Pathfinders. So we have professional communication. So things that characterize professional communication, you're going to be the purpose of the communication. Generally speaking, in a professional setting, you're trying to just relay information. That is the purpose of communication in a professional setting. So now your methods are going to range. You're going to have a variety. You're going to have the spoken word, the written word. You're going to have multimedia. You're going to have many different methods. You may even just write a memo and post that for your associates to look at. So there are many different methods of communication, but generally speaking, they're short term and they're going to be more person to person. You're going to be looking at a low emotion, high logic situation. So you're in a professional setting. There's very little room for emotion in a professional setting. So you're going to keep your communications at a low emotion and a high logic and reasoning setting. And here's where we look at the three C's: the complete, clear, and concise. You want to have as much information available to you as possible, and you need to relay as much information as possible to those that you're trying to communicate with. You need to be clear. You need to use clear terminology. You don't want to use slang that people aren't going to understand. These kids these days, you say, "Hey, do you want to do this?" and they'll say the word "bet." I, I'm a teenager's dad, so I kind of am catching on to some of it. My technique for getting rid of some of those weird sayings is to use them myself. Then they become very uncool and the teenagers stop using them. But it seems like they're using them a lot or coming up with them a lot quicker than I can destroy them. So I'm slowly working at making uncool a lot of these terms, but you need to be clear. That also talks about enunciation. So if you can talk clearly and enunciate your words, and today I'm not being extremely clear because my voice is out. So there's, you guys are understanding me, which is good, but it's still not as clear as it could be and should be. So we just work through what we have to make things go. Now, concise is another huge one. When you start droning on and on, like I tend to do, you lose people's interest. And then when you lose their interest, the information is not being relayed. So you need to keep it, even though you want to be complete and be able to relay as much information as possible, you need to do it in a concise, quick manner short, sweet, and simple. Especially at like board meetings. If, as a director, you go to a board meeting and you want to be the favorite person at a board meeting, you will very quickly become that if you keep your information complete, clear, and concise. You follow the procedures set by your church. So I know, excuse me, for I believe Central has a system set up to where you email the secretary with some of the information you want to talk about, and you get that sent in so that they can get you on the agenda. And when it comes to your time to talk, you give them dates, facts, figures, and say, this is what we want to do. And now, in the process of a board meeting, most of you know, but some may not, that you come in and you say, okay, you get to the end of your clear and concise explanation, and you say, I would like to make a motion that this happens, or however you need to word it for exactly what your motion is. At which point, the chair of the board, oftentimes the pastor, but doesn't have to be, will say, is there a second? At which point there may be support for it. And then the chair will say, is there any discussion? At that point, you are then ready with your papers of information so that when they ask questions, you're ready to answer them. And if you don't have an answer, say, you know what, I can get back to you with that information. But you need to have as much information in front of you to answer those questions as possible. I was head deacon in Hillsdale for a while, and one of the things I was tasked with was when we moved from our old church to our new church, we were looking at yard care. We went from a very small city lot to I think we're at almost just over an acre, acre and a half, something like that. So we had to really think about how we were going to go about taking care of the yard. We went from a push mower to all this space to work with. So we had to figure out what was going to be the best options. So I brought to them a complete breakdown with 4 different styles of mower that, 4 different options, and within those options, 3 different more options. So I had done a great deal of research, and when I brought it to the board, I was able to be clear and concise and say, this is my opinion. And then when they had a bunch of questions, I had all that information laid out in front of me, and I could answer any and all questions. So by the time we got to the point of finishing the vote and the end of the discussion, no one had any problems. Everything was clear, and there was a quick vote, and off we went. And if you can keep it especially concise in board meetings, everybody's happier when the board meetings move along quickly. So not only are you going to score points with the church and the church board, but you're going to make it so that Pathfinders run so much smoother if you can follow these 3 C's. Now, on the receiving side of the professional communication, you're going to have active listening. So a lot of us, when we're sitting here talking to one another, we subconsciously are nodding. I'm sure you probably don't notice it, but as I'm talking today, you'll find out, you'll see that you'll catch yourself just kind of gently nodding along. You're making eye contact. You're going to be showing the person that you are attentive, that they have your attention, and that their information is being relayed. Again, it's still low emotion, high logic. So as a receiver, you have to understand that in a professional setting, it is going to be low emotion. This person is not trying to get at you, attack you, or any of this. It is just relaying information. Now, the only time that could be a little bit different is if you're in HR, but if you get called into HR, there's probably a few other problems going on. So you're going to want to keep your communication and your listening to a low emotion. High logic. Okay, what does this person actually mean? What is the information they're trying to relay? Be rational about things. Don't let the emotions take off with you. Another receiving skill or listening skill is summarizing. Sometimes when there's a lot of information being spewed out of the communicator, you have to show that you understand what they're talking about. So sometimes you just summarize what they said and repeat it back to them so that they know you understand. And then ask clarifying questions. If you don't understand something they said and that they weren't as clear as they could have been, ask a few questions to clarify any points. Also, something you can do is take notes, especially at like board meetings when there's a lot of information coming out. You're going to want to take notes. And then there's going to be a wrap up at the end where there's the cordial thank you for coming kind of thing, separation goodbye stuff. So that's your wrap up for your professional communication. Okay, on to the next one. We're going to have personal communication. So again, you have your purpose of communication. This could be a couple of different reasons. Sometimes you thought of something funny and you're with your friends and you just wanted to say a joke and create some levity in the room or the situation. Sometimes you're trying to relay information. Sometimes, especially for guys, we just razz each other. We pick on each other. We poke at each other. We don't have any ill intentions by it, but we will pick on each other from time to time. I know Brenda and I give each other a hard time a lot, but that's just the way we are. That's what we do. Again, to go back to methods, there's the methods of communication. Are you going to be in your personal communication more often than not? You're going to be talking, whether it be talking face to face, over the phone, even text messages. That's some of the ways that Brandon and I communicate is via text message. This one you're going to have middle of the range emotion because it is friends. It is just personal communication. So there is a little more room for emotion. And you're not worried about focusing on the logic and the rationale for the communication because sometimes, like in a joke, there is no real logic and rationale. It's a joke. So you're going to want to kind of tone it down on your logic and your reasoning and let some more emotions take place. Um, Now, this is where you're going to find a lot of conversation rabbit trails. Conversations with friends are going to go off on a tangent sometimes. Um, I know when Brandon and I are driving and we're talking on our headsets, the conversation runs anywhere from things going on with Pathfinder clubs to Master Guide to we're talking about when he was in the Navy and our families, and our conversations just trail. They just run like crazy. And it's okay to do that in a personal communication as long as everybody's on that rabbit trail and having fun going down that rabbit trail. But kind of keep that in mind as you're communicating. Sometimes you got to bring it off that rabbit trail. Um, they tend to be you tend to have some more shallow conversations. Again, like when Brandon and I are talking about miscellaneous things that are happening, where he's talking about where he's getting out of the truck and pulling the hoses around and hooking them up to the truck. That's not a super deep conversation. He's just telling me that the reason why he's having issues or with the headset is because he's in a building he doesn't get reception, or when I'm just commenting that he's stopping 8 to 10 times a day to pull these hoses around, and I stop once a day to not even pull a hose and let somebody else offload my trailer. And I kind of laugh at him a little bit and poke at him. And then I call him part time because he gets done before I do during the day. But in all actuality, he works a lot harder than I do at work. So it's just one of those shallow, fun, poking conversations that he and I will have every now and again. Another thing that we do in like personal communication is brainstorming. Brandon and I talk a lot about this program, and if it weren't for us just sitting there talking and um, running down random rabbit trails, that's kind of how this program happened. Is we were talking about how Master Guide is kind of fallen off, and there's not a lot of resources for Master Guides to get their program completed, and through a brainstorming session, that was the birth of this Master Guide Club. So, excuse me. So they can be brainstorming sessions to have these in these personal communications. You can do brainstorming in a professional setting, but generally speaking, your brainstorming is done in your office or back at wherever you're doing your own personal preparation for the meeting, and then you bring your information to that meeting. So when you're on the receiving end of personal communication, obviously you're going to still use active listening, especially when you're face to face talking. You tend to do a lot more nodding and smiling and shaking your head no or agreeing, or there's a lot more physical active listening that shows the other person that you are involved um, in that conversation. Uh, Still, you're looking at mid-level emotion, more emotion, but still not high level. Your mid-level logic, you're going to be receiving some information, but it's not like super life-changing information. It's not something you really have to take notes on. You can if you want to, but generally speaking, you don't take notes on personal communication unless they're really relaying a lot of information to you. Once in a while, Brandon, when Brandon and I are talking and we're coming up with ideas, we do take notes. We have a note sharing app on our phones that we can put in information, and we can just keep track of some of the stuff we talk about. But more often than not, you're not taking notes in a personal communication. You are going to want to do every now and again summarize and repeat. Um, there's not as much of this. You're going to do more like your responses are going to be related to what they said. So when you're talking about Christmas and about the decorations you put up, and you're gonna the person listening is going to be, okay, yeah, we had done some of that. We had hung up our lights, and I can reach the outside of the house all except for the peak, so we got to go up on the roof to get the peak. And so you can uh, let them know that you're listening, and uh, kind of repeat what they're saying back to them to let them know you're listening without doing a full summary and repeat. You're just continuing on the conversation in the same topic. Sometimes you do have to ask clarifying questions. There's situations where, especially in personal communication, they're not going to be as clear and concise. As you see, we don't have that on the screen there in the three C's. You're not as worried about being complete, clear, and concise because it is personal communication. But being in a personal situation like that, it's easier to ask clarifying questions, especially with a one-on-one face-to-face. And then your wrap up is going to be less professional, more of a goodbye, handshake, hug, whatever you do as your typical goodbye with your friends. Um, some guys like to slug each other on the shoulders. It just depends on your friend group, the individuals involved, but it's going to be your goodbye. And there's a lot that can actually be said within the goodbye itself as to the personal nature of the relationship between you and your friend. So we're going to move on here to the next one. This is like a familial or a marital communication. This is the most intimate form of communication. So the purpose of the communication in this is you could be relaying some very important information when it's talks between spouses. Um, there can be instructions given from parents to kids. Um, there's the fun of it. There's another thing that can be a purpose would be at the end of the day when my wife and I talk. It's an opportunity for both of us to kind of unwind and get the stress of the day off our shoulders. And uh, I know from the conversation I have with her at the end of the day as to um, how best I need to help her through the rest of the day. Does she need the garbage taken out? Does she need the living room tidied up? Does she need help in any way? There's been a couple times where I've come back and I've just had a garbage day. She can sense that during my decompression time, and so there's different things that we do to help each other at the end of the day, and it makes for a very nice reunion at the end of the day. there's def there's a lot of methods that are used for this kind of communication. There's the spoken communications. There's the voicemails, the text messages. There's FaceTime calls. Um, there's a lot of um, nonverbal communication done, especially in a marital communication situation. Um, like right now, my voice is going out. So when I'm done with these seminars, I'm pretty much good. My wife has said I have to be on no talking. So the way we communicate, or we're going to be communicating, is via text message. So we're going to have our phones with us. And anytime I got to say something, I'm going to text it to her. And hopefully this will get rid of this, what we believe is a vocal strain that I've been dealing with. This is the kind of communication we're going to be dealing with very high emotions. Every husband and wife in here knows that this is going to be fraught with emotion. A lot of people tend to men tend to use logic more in our rationale in our conversations. Women tend to be more highly emotional. And this is when it really shows because in a professional setting, women know that it's a professional setting. So they, even though they feel the emotions, they table it and they draw it back in and then they deal with that personally. But in a marital communication or familial communication, that's the time where they feel the most comfortable and they want to be able to express emotions. And guys tend to have a really difficult time with the amount of emotion coming from this woman. And we really want to help her and, help her feel better. Sometimes all we got to do is say, hey, is this something where you want me to just listen or do you want me to fix a problem? And if she says, no, I just want you to listen and hear me out, then it's time for us as guys to sit back and say, hey, all right, you talk all you want, and I will offer no solutions. Even if there is a clear and obvious solution, I will not offer this clear and obvious solution. Excuse me. And the women have to understand that men hear things and we communicate our our communication is more on getting things fixed and relaying information. So the women have to understand that when a guy is talking, he's either trying to offload his day or he's trying to figure something out and and he's not really looking to just talk. He doesn't need to just talk for the sake of talking just to be heard. Like I said, there are rare exceptions. Like my wife and I have a time in the evening where I come home and we have a decompression, or I believe they call it I'm trying to remember what the military and the medical field call it, but um, it's a time where what's that? No, that's not PTSD. I got Brandon in my ear. He's kind of helping me out a little bit. Um, but you're going to um, when you come back from a mission and they sit down and talk to you. A debriefing. Thank you, Brandon. Yeah, so it's a debriefing kind of time where both parties know that that is the purpose of the conversation, and you're going to have this time to just talk out what you dealt with. Granted, my conversation is less than 30 seconds because I'll say, all right, yep, I got up, got in the truck, drove to Pennsylvania. There really nothing was an issue there. They loaded the trailer and I drove home. Granted, that's a 12-hour day that I just covered in less than 10 seconds and nothing really happened. So it tends to be more me listening to how her day went than her listening to my day. But something you're going to want to do to keep the emotions in check is you're going to want to avoid you statements. They tend to be very inflammatory and accusatory. So unless it's a compliment where I'm telling my wife that she looks so beautiful today, avoiding you statements are going to be very beneficial in keeping the emotions from boiling over and from becoming a block in your communication. You also want to avoid extremes like never and always. Um, when she's at home and she says, no one ever helps me with the chores around the house. I used to take offense to that because I come home and I'm always doing chores around the house trying to help her. And she was not talking about me. She was talking about the fact that the kids don't lift a finger to help around the house. Familial and marital communication. Um, my wife just left. She's going to Toledo to visit her family, and so she was saying goodbye. So we're going to go back here. Avoiding our extremes. So I had to realize that when she says no one ever helps around here, she's really talking about the kids, and so we had to implement a chore schedule where every night we have a little electronic calendar on our wall, and they can go to the calendar and find their name and their chore for the day. And so things tend to get done a little better around here, and she's not so overloaded. Um, another thing that we have to understand, especially in a marital, but it can affect familial communication, is the difference between love and respect. Now, there is actually a 7 video series that I cannot recommend highly enough, no matter how old you are or how long you've been married. You will get something very useful out of this love and respect seminar that these two do. It's a husband and wife team, and like I said, I cannot recommend it highly enough. My daughter has just started seeing a young man that goes to school with her, and this is something I'm going to strongly encourage, if not make them watch, is this particular series. And it's really good information. So the principle behind it, if you haven't seen it already, is women operate on love. And it goes to a biblical standing. I don't have the verse right in front of me, but it's where God talks to the husband and the wife. He says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. So that's the instruction God gave, because he knew when he created man that men brought on respect, and we don't operate like women do on love. So we are given the instructions to love our wives, and the wives are given the instructions to respect their husbands or honor their husbands, depending on the translation you use, because the women run primarily on love, and respect doesn't come natural to them. So they are instructed to respect and honor their husbands. Husbands are instructed to love and cherish their wives. So right there is the basis for the entire seminar. And if we understand that, it's going to be easier to keep the emotions at a more manageable level. If I'm being unloving to my wife, that's like me standing on her air hose. Like if she and I were scuba diving and I was clamped off her air hose, that would eventually she would starve out of oxygen and pass out. So the same thing with love is if I am not giving her enough love, then she feels this deep desire, this deep need for love from me. Same thing if she is not being respectful and uh, appreciative of me. I feel starved because I run on respect and appreciation as a man. Excuse me. And so this is huge for husbands and wives to understand. And the way it actually works with our families is because my daughter needs to be loved. So I need to be showing my daughter love and I need to be showing my son respect. We go to family gatherings. My father in law needs to be shown respect. My wife's uncle needs to be, it's often at my wife's uncle's house. So to be respectful of him and his house and, you know, showing him respect. But then it's important to show the women especially, that that they are loved by us as family members. So when we go into receiving this kind of communication, active listening is extremely important because oftentimes, even if it's rabbit trail like, being and actively listening to your partner can show that respect, can show that love. It's very loving of me to attentively listen to whatever my wife is saying. In fact, there was a moment a little bit ago, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I have really tried over the 17 years that my wife and I have been married to learn and grow and to be the husband that she deserves. And so I will put my phone down. I will look her directly in the eye, and oftentimes I'll pull her close. And she was telling me about a book she just read, and I did absolutely nothing but look her directly in the eye and listen to her entire explanation. And she apologized at the end, saying, "Well, you're probably not interested in this. It's not really a genre that you would be interested in." And I said, "It doesn't matter. If it matters to you, it matters to me, and I'm going to listen to what you had to say about it." And I was, looking her in the eye, and there was a couple points in the book where, as she was talking about it, you could kind of get the idea of what was going to happen next, and so you kind of smile and nod and say, "Oh yeah, they did do that," and interacting with her as she's telling me about this book. And that made her feel extremely loved, that I was going to take the time to listen to her, not only just to listen to her, but about something that I really didn't care about, because I would never have picked that book up and read it. It was kind of a mystery, almost fiction. It was fictional, almost sci-fi. It was, I don't know, it's kind of an odd book that I would have never picked up and read. But she read it, she liked it, and she told me about it. And I wanted her to feel that not only I loved her, but that I cared about what she cares about. And so active listening is extremely important in marital communication. Again, it's still high emotion, very high and very varying levels of logic. Um, Summarizing and repeating is important, especially in very important conversations, because some marital conversations are information relays. So my wife is telling me, "Hey, we're going to my family's this weekend for Easter." Obviously, it was a couple weeks ago, but the most recent example. And if she doesn't remember to do that, and I'm coming into a weekend, I actually will tell her, "Hey, I'm bringing the truck home this weekend. I need to replace the air tanks and the airbags on it. Do we have anything going on this weekend?" And she'll say, "Oh yeah, well, we got to go to my aunt's on Sunday in the afternoon." And I'll say, "Okay, well, what time does it start?" She said 2 o'clock. I said, "Okay, I think I can get most of it done by then, and I may have to leave the event early. I might leave by 4 o'clock, 4:30, something in that area, so I can go back and finish the truck." So we were able to communicate that information, and she knew way ahead of time that I was going to bring the truck home, I was going to work on it, and I was going to be going to the family event, but I was going to have to leave early to go work on the truck. So we had all that taken care of. We had the cars we needed to for me to be able to leave early. Granted, her aunt lives like an eighth of a mile down the road, if that, maybe a 16th, but it was a little far to walk in that much cold. So um, we had everything we needed to, and the communication was very effective because we had um, repeated to each other, and we had um, took the time to relay our needs and the things we needed to complete. Clarifying questions is huge. Excuse me. Clarifying questions. When my wife and I are in a very important discussion, we will need to ask clarifying questions, especially because it's such a high emotional type of communication. We need to be clear on what we're trying to say. Um, and women have a tendency to say things that don't necessarily mean the face value of the word. So if she's upset and she says, I'm fine, every man knows she's not fine. There's something wrong. Um, so we have to get clarification. If I'm talking about something with the truck, and my wife is a great person and a really fast learner. She knows a lot more of the trucking lingo than most people do. But there's some things that I say that doesn't make any sense to her because one time in particular, I was saying, oh, well, we got to go across the road. Well, she's like, well, we're on a corner. Which road? I said, well, this is a road because it's 4 lanes with a 4 lanes with a turning lane. And this road over here is a 2 lane, a one in each direction. That I'm just going to call it a way. So we got to go either across the way or across the road. So when I talk about, certain words, they're going to mean a little bit differently because of what I do as a trucker. So when I say the word big road, she knows what that means because I'm talking about being up on the interstate. Um, so asking clarifying questions is going to be important. Always assume the best. Okay. I know my wife loves me and she wants what's best for me. So if she's having a hard time and she's communicating, and I cannot stress enough, go watch the series of Love and Respect. When women are um, stressed and they're emotionally fried and they're I don't even know the best way to describe it really because I'm a guy. I don't understand it. I know it, but I don't understand it. And when she's very emotional in her conversation, sometimes she's not always saying the best things, and it can come across as inflammatory, like you statements, or never and always, or I only ever this. And they can sound very inflammatory, but I know that she does not dislike me. She doesn't want me to be like the other guys. And, I always have to think that she has the best of intentions, but what she's saying right now is coming from a place of emotion. And I need to just relax and let her talk and we'll figure it out. And I can ask my clarifying questions a little bit later, but I don't need to be hurt by what she's saying. We'll clarify it and we'll see what she really means in a little bit. Same thing on her end. If I say something and she's really high emotionally, then I might say something that is fairly benign and on its face is what I mean, but she's going to hear it a little differently. And she has to understand that I don't mean anything bad by it. And she can then, once I'm done talking, she can ask her clarifying questions and find out, hey, was I really being a jerk to her? Or did I mean something at face value? And she's just needs to settle into what the actual meaning of it was. That's not the greatest example I know, but there in marital communication, you can't predict anything, even though it seems like women have the conversation already from beginning to end figured out. She knows what you're going to say, and it's kind of frustrating at times. The best thing to do is assume the best about your partner and also about your kids. So we're looking at the familial side of it. Is my daughter really trying to be mean, or is she just having a tough time emotionally? And then uh, same one. And then we're going to go to what I call the goodbye tour at the bottom. Now, the reason I call it the goodbye tour is I'm not a very huggy kind of person. When I leave a family event, I stand at the door and raise my voice a little bit and say, goodbye, everybody. It was nice seeing you. We'll see you next time. And then I leave. Right? That's the end of it for me. But my wife and her family, they are very huggy, very touchy. And so, her and the kids, I say, all right, we got to get going. And I know I have at least a half an hour, if not an hour, of the goodbye tour. That means they go around and give everybody a hug and say goodbye. And sometimes there's a little more talking going on. So, about an hour before I really want to leave, I will say, all right, we should probably start the goodbye tour. And so then they start their goodbye process. So that is going to be more in your family and those kind of conversations. So we're going to go to the next slide, the nonverbal communication. Now we all are fairly familiar with this, but this is part of your active listening. So you're going to have gestures. A lot of you will see when I'm in person, I do a lot of hand gestures because this video. I'm not a very small person, and this I fill up the screen with my shoulders and my head, so you can't see what my hands are doing down below the screen. But even now I'm still moving my hands around, and you might see my shoulders moving to see my arms are moving. But gestures are huge for nonverbal communication. You could be saying, "Hey, we went way over there," and you end up taking your arm and you way over yonder, and it a lot of us do it subconsciously. We just use our hands and our bodies to communicate. um, if you see someone walking up to you, you can tell by the way they're walking and their gait. Are they relaxed? Are they angry? Are they tired? There's some things you don't even have to say a word, and you can see by the way their body is moving that they're they're dealing with something. Facial expressions is another one. Um, you're going to have, like right now, I'm not really super happy, not sad. I'm just presenting. So every now and again, I'll smile a little bit, but facial expressions can tell a lot, especially in like family communications and marital communications. Your facial expressions tell probably more than what your words are saying. So you got to be mindful. A lot of people have what you can call a tell. So it's a gambling term. They'll do something with their face or something else, and if they have good cards, they'll either they'll look off to the right or they'll kind of do something. They'll make a sound, but they'll have a tell, and a lot of our tells are in our facial expressions. We don't realize it's happening. So if something that we're talking about is disgusting, we may not realize that we scrunch up our noses at the sound of it, or these things that we don't realize is happening, we do a lot of facial expressions that we don't realize. Um, if you ever start talking and then someone you don't care for comes in and starts talking, you kind of get this, I don't really want to talk to this person. And you can see the facial change of the person that is doing the listening, not wanting to talk to this person. So we talked a little bit about body language. Um, there's so many tells in your body language. So if you're hunched over and your arms are tucked in tight, odds are you're cold or you're closed off and you don't want to talk. But if you sit back and you open up your shoulders and your arms are down at your sides, you tend to be more approachable. You're likely to be warm, a little more comfortable. Um, I'm leaned forward a little bit for the camera purposes, but generally speaking, in this chair, I'll sit way back and I'm totally relaxed and comfortable. And then the positioning of people's feet. If you're talking to someone and both of their feet are pointed at you, they're really engaged in the conversation. But if one of their feet is pointed off to the side and they have a slight turn to their body, they're kind of waiting for you to stop talking so they can leave. So there are a lot of things that you can pick up on. And like I said, we could spend hours talking about different forms of communication. And this would be a good, easy hour in and of itself. But we're going to keep going here to the vocal nuances like tone and rhythm. So my kids have learned very quickly. We had talked about this a little bit ago, or a couple days, was it? I think it was yesterday. We talked about I have three different voices. I have my normal talking voice. I have my dad voice, which my kids know when I use my dad voice, it's time to be serious. They need to not play around. Dad's being serious. And then I have my third voice, which is my military style voice, where I'm the boss. I am, for a lack of a better term, the alpha here. I know more than you, and you're not going to treat me and talk to me this way. I am being nice to you. I am being polite to you, but you should be able to tell by the tone of my voice that if you keep up your activity and your actions, I will have some strong words for you and you will be moving on. I had that situation um, where someone came up to me and was trying to tell me how to do things. And I used my very polite but very firm voice and saying, okay, I will do this. I understand this has to be done, but I will do this on my time when I'm ready to do it. And I believe this other person got the message that they were not going to tell me how to do what I needed to do. So we can change our vocal tones and our rhythm. Um, I my wife and kids have cats, and I say that specifically because not that I hate cats or dogs, I'm just not an animal person. I'm not a pet person. I don't personally own any pets. They're in my house, yes, and so there could be the argument made that I have pets, but I do not. In fact, I do not take care of any of them. I don't feed them. I don't water them. I don't let. I can hear them scratching on a door. I don't let them out of the door. I don't. I have nothing to do with the animals. And it was. I didn't say I hated cats. So Brandon came in my ear and said everyone was angry at me for hating cats. And I said, I didn't hate cats. They have their purpose. But to me, an animal has to have a purpose to offset the cost. And these cats in my house do not offset the cost. Not only their food and their litter, but the time dealing with them and the fact that they've destroyed at least three of my pieces of furniture in my living room. So it's kind of a point of contention. But back to what I was talking about, there I was going on a rabbit trail. Back to what I was talking about, when my wife and my kids talk to the cats, I call it ooey gooing them. They get their higher pitched voices and the ooty dooty dooty dooty. They're cats, and I call it ooey goo and the cats. And they do that with the rabbits, and so they change their tone when they're talking to the cats and the rabbits, and they get their weird ooey gooey noises. And so you can actually get animals to respond based on just your tones. So if you look at a dog and you say, "Do you want to eat some toxic waste?" and you get really excited, and the dog will be like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." So you can really, just by your tone, you can change how people respond to you. I saw a video of a dad at Christmas time, and his little like 2-year-old son had got pajamas in his present. And it was his present was pajamas. And so the dad got all excited. All right, pajamas. He got all excited. And the kid actually stood up, started jumping around. Yeah, 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 yeah. Over clothing on Christmas morning. So it's all in your tone and your rhythm, your expressions, your gestures. A lot can happen just in your nonverbal communication. So we'll go to our next slide here. So which category do Pathfinder leaders use? And the answer is all of them, all four of them. We have our times where we have to have our professional conversations, whether it be at a staff meeting or at a board meeting, or we're talking with the conference, whether it be an area coordinator or Pastor Harris himself. We have our professional conversations. We also have personal conversations. It could be with the same people, but different setting. Excuse me. Your personal conversations could be with your staff, could be with the kids, could be with Pastor Harris, the coordinators. I know Brandon and I will go and talk to a couple of the coordinators, and it's just kind of a social visit. It's not a professional information exchange. It's just a social visit. So we have the professional, the personal, and the familial. Are we going to have familial conversations in our Pathfinder clubs? And yes, we are. A lot of clubs are run or at least have staff that have married couples in them. And a lot of us have our kids in our clubs. Um, and a lot of clubs, especially the smaller ones, tend to become a family. Like we talked about yesterday in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's a sense of belonging to a club. So it becomes a little more than just a group of friends. It almost becomes like a family. So there is definitely the familial communication, and nonverbal. That's easy. Our kids will learn. Our Pathfinder kids will learn our, parental voice, our happy-go-lucky normal voice. They'll even once in a while they'll hear our military voice where it's serious and I'm the boss kind of voice. So we are going to be using all four forms of communication in our work with our Pathfinders. Our next slide is questions. Does anybody have any questions for us this time?
Hey, Matt.
Hello, how are you?
I had to write down my questions. Okay, the first question goes all the way back to, I think it was the second slide or so, but it was where does the language fall into, oh, sorry. Can you hear me now, Matt? Sorry, I put down the phone.
I can hear you a little bit better. Yeah,
Okay,
thank you.
sorry. So the first question goes all the way back to, I think, the second slide. Where does language fall into when you were talking about the source going to the message, the channel, and the receiver? Would language in itself, would that be part of the code that's being used for communication? Or would it be more in like the social cultural system category?
It's both. Generally, when I talk about code, it's about the actual language used. So there could be, I know you speak Spanish. I speak trucker and sarcasm. Um, I there is Morse code. There's I know the military uses. I can't remember the name of it, but they have words for every letter. So when they're just saying letters that kind of blend together, they're using. I think it's a phonetic code. So it's all about the code portion is the way you're the language in which you use. Now, when it changes to the method, that is going to be under. I'm looking at the slide right now. That would be under your your content and your treatment is the way you would send that message, whether it be text message, phone call. There's so you have your language and your method. Does that clear that up?
Yeah, I just didn't know where the language would, but it would be then more of the source under social cultural system because you're relaying the language in that language that you're communicating, because then it'll also be in the receiver in the social cultural system that you're utilizing the language in order to communicate. Because, like, for example, like I thought about, let's say it's a Pathfinder group that has maybe 50% of Pathfinders speak English, 50% of Pathfinders speak another language, and then so you have to percent, let's say, whatever in two different languages. So I'm just wondering how would that be clarified in this communication? Like, I know this is more structural, but I just don't know where the language aspect falls in which little box.
Well, it's a good question because structural is important in your communication. Is you have to have again your three C's: clear, complete, and concise. So your the language you use is going to be part of your encoding, your code.
Okay.
When you talk about your kids are going to be in different um, have different languages, that's where you go into your social and cultural. You have to understand your demographic around you. So you have to understand that half of your Pathfinder club speaks a different language and the other half speaks English. So you're going to have to know that social, excuse me, dynamic that is within your club. You're also going to have to understand that these kids, in your social aspect, your kids are going to be using words like dope and finna and all these other weird social, friendly kind of words that they use with each other that adults really don't understand outside of context. So, yes, language does have a lot to do with culture and they can overlap, but generally speaking, your language is going to fall in with your code and the fact that you have a diverse group is going to fall under your social and cultural, but they're all being worked together because your social and cultural is going to be more part of your structure and your planning, whereas your language is just your spoken word. And generally speaking, in this country, we all speak and understand English. So it's really there is a little bit of a difference, but it can fall into both categories.
Okay, yeah, that does answer. Thank you. And then the other question was, you went very specifically into the process of presenting a motion in a board meeting. You were very thorough. It was wonderful. There was no PowerPoint to me write down the steps. So I was wondering if you can
Elaborate
review
on how
that
to.
and make a list of that, because it was wonderful. It was like to the T, even the timing of attendance and everything. So I do appreciate that. It's just I couldn't write it all on the steps. I think the first
Right.
one I remember was you email the secretary. I wrote that one down. But the whole step process of the process to present a motion in a board meeting, because for those who haven't ever been in that environment, not knowing what's the due protocol, like you indicated.
Right. So what I did when I became a board member is I went to the church manual and I looked up all the positions because at one point I held 4 board positions. I was Pathfinder director, men's ministries leader, head deacon, and the clerk. So I held 4 board positions at one point. And so I looked up in the church manual the correct process for all of my jobs that I had and the proper way to conduct a board meeting. Now I know there at Central, the chair of the board is not the pastor, and so that works for Central, and that's great. Hillsdale is a smaller club, a smaller church, and so the chair of the board is also the pastor and sometimes the head elder, depending on who's there. And we have an issue with attendance, but when you bring information to the board, you want to follow those 3 C's. So it's going to be on the professional communication slide, um, where you want to have all your information. So you're going to do all your research so that when you present, you're going to have your, like when I did the lawnmower, we could do either a ride on regular lawn tractor, a garden tractor, a 1 series tractor where it's got a bunch of different attachments, a 0 turn, and a service. And then in each category, I had 3 options. So I had done probably 3 weeks worth of research, and I had all that information compiled into the papers in front of me. And then I did like what you see here on these slideshow presentations. I have bullet points. So I can look at a bullet point and say, okay, purpose of communication under professional communication, the purpose of it, and then I can look up and talk to you and tell you the information under purpose of communication. So then you got to compile and condense, consolidate all your information so you present a clear and complete picture without going on rabbit trails and getting sidetracked on a lot of just stuff you don't really need to talk about. And then something else you're going to find during a board meeting, once you've presented your information, you make the motion. And you say, I make a motion to accept this recommendation. And then someone else has the opportunity to second the motion. And then it's time for discussion. And everybody at the board then can ask you a bunch of questions. And then you have that pile of papers in front of you with all the extra information that you didn't give during your clear, concise presentation. And then they can ask questions. You have it all right there in front of you. Kind of like if you remember the press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, she had that folder with all kinds of information so that as soon as they asked her a question, she flipped to it and she had it right there. So that is part of being prepared for a board meeting, is having all your information. Like I said, I had 3 weeks of research for about 10 minutes in a board meeting because I had so much I needed to cover and information I needed to have at the ready so I could keep my presentation complete, clear, and concise.
Great. So you did say you found out the order of events in a church manual. Does the church manual vary per church?
No, it's the
The
conference
conference one. Okay,
issued. Yes,
I got it. Thank you very much, Matt. Any other questions?
you're welcome. All right, are there any other questions?
Wait, I've got one.
Oh, okay, yep.
Tell us about your hatred of cats. We're all cat lovers here.
Okay, so I will expand on that a little bit. Um, Cats, any animal really, like fish, birds, cats, dogs, horses, goats, cows, whatever animal you can think of, there has to be, again, I'm a guy, I'm very logical. There has to be a cost and effect. So when I have to put out money, hard earned money, especially in this economy, when I have to put out money for food, for care, for vet, for all these different expenditures for an animal, I have to get some sort of benefit to offset that cost. Now, a lot of people like yourselves that are cat lovers, the mere presence of the cat, being able to pet the cat and enjoy the cat's company is enough compensation for the expenditure that you're putting forward. I don't care to touch cats. It's nothing, it doesn't bring me any kind of pleasure. It doesn't, their existence doesn't bring me any kind of joy. We don't have a mouse problem, so having cats really doesn't affect us. And the reason I say it doesn't is because we didn't have cats when we moved in, and we've never had a mouse problem. There's enough cats in the neighborhood that there is no rodent issue. And then so I see a cost of food, a cost of litter, a cost of any vet bills, and then I see my furniture being clawed up and destroyed. And it just, I don't, it does not offset for me. So I just don't want to have cats. It's not that I hate them. It's not that I want to cause any damage to them. I just, it doesn't bring me any joy to have a cat around. So I don't care for cats, dogs, really anything. All right, so we're going to go to our next seminar after about a 15 minutes break. So well, it'll be about 12-minute break. So at 10:45, we'll come back and we'll be doing education theory and practice. right, welcome back. A little bit, we got a minute late there, but that's okay. Um, we are going to be working on education, theory, and practice. Now, this has the potential for being a little bit controversial, so I hope that you will just hear me out, and um, you'll see where I'm trying to go with this once we get further down. So we'll get started here. The first slide is going to be learning theories, so education theories. So the definition of a learning theory is a framework that explains how people acquire and retain knowledge. They provide a systematic way to understand how individuals process and respond to new information. Different theories focus on different aspects of the learning process, such as cognitive, behavioral, and constructive approaches. An example of this would be of behaviorism, which focuses on observable and measurable behaviors. This theory suggests that learning occurs through the reinforcement or punishment of certain actions. For example, in a classroom setting, a student may receive praise for a good grade for completing a task correctly, reinforcing the behavior of completing tasks. And like with communication theory, it is an idea, a concept, which based on this is good. And like with a lot of theories and concepts, it started out good. So in our next slide, we're going to see a picture of the original four theories. And again, when things start out as theory, they generally are a good idea and come from a good place. So we have behaviorism, cognitive, cognitivism, interesting word, humanism, and constructivism. Well, over the years, and when you get into studying the learning theories, over the years, more and more people, highly educated people, have done studies into each of these categories. And it went from these four categories to 16. Now, we get to see all these theories in action. And that's when we start to see the problems is all these people, all these supposedly super smart people come up with these theories and these concepts. And when they're actually put into action, that's when the problems happen, when the rubber meets the road. So now that we have all these interesting theories, what have we seen develop? Well, now there's this diagnosis for ADD and ADHD. Are those legitimate diagnoses? I cannot make that determination. I am not a doctor or a psychologist or any of that. But a lot of the people that are diagnosed with ADD or ADHD, it's based off of their actions in school. So I would have been diagnosed with ADD, but I wasn't given an option. I was told by my father that I was going to sit down, buckle down, and do the work and get it over with. So I was never diagnosed or brought in for any kind of testing and any of that. So I didn't find out until I was an adult that I had characteristics, and I believe I was ADD. Um, so I don't know where I stand on that other than kids, especially young kids, full of energy. The worst thing you could do is make them sit down in a class for 7 hours through school. Of course, you're going to have anxious kids that are hyper and running around. So I tend to take some issue with the current um, school system. And with this ADD, they introduced drugs like Ritalin, which, if I'm not mistaken, is a form of amphetamine. So now we have these kids that are restless because they are full of energy and they don't want to be sitting there listening to some adult drone on about something and they really don't care about, especially like history class. And because they're fidgety, we now pump them full of drugs, including amphetamines, and we wonder why there's a drug problem that is ever growing in this country. And then we look at the decline of our society. We have all these kids on these medications and um, behavior adjusting drugs that, yeah, may adjust their behavior, but it has major side effects and long term ramifications. And then we have a bunch of kids graduating college with no marketable skills, and most of them don't even have a the skills necessary to survive life. I had seen a study done where they had asked a bunch of college graduates, what are some things you wished you would have learned while in college? And the majority of the answers were, I wish I'd have learned how to do laundry. I wish I'd have learned how to balance a checkbook. I wish I'd have learned how to change the tire on my car. All these basic life skills, these college graduates don't have because, one, high school, they got rid of all the practical, usable skills in shop class, home ec, and they actually used to, back I believe in the 50s, they used to teach gun safety. Now we have a bunch of people that are graduating college scared to death of guns because they've never been taught how to use them and how to use them safely. They're scared of power tools because they've never been taught how to use them and use them safely. So we have a massive issue with a bunch of college graduates with, frankly, degrees that mean nothing, and they can't get a job outside of the education system with these degrees, and they end up sitting in their parents' basement at 30 and 35 years old with no marketable skills. And then we start seeing critical race theory being introduced to some schools, especially in the bigger cities. And we all know that there's a massive issue with race theory when Martin Luther King Jr. says, I have a dream that man will be judged on the content of his character and not the color of his skin. Well, we've seen a complete 180 from that dream, that goal that was set out by our uh, our uh, visionary leaders, and now we're right back into the swamp and the mire of the racial segregation. And races are doing it to themselves. They're segregating themselves off. I know when I was in high school, coming back on the bus, it used to be where, in Rosa Parks days, where all the African Americans were sent to the back of the bus because of the color of their skin. Well, when I was in high school, a white person couldn't be in the back of the bus because that was where all the African Americans were going to be. And if you were back there and they didn't like you, they would physically move you out of those seats. So it's been reversing for a while, but it's gotten really bad lately to where we went from this drive to integrate to now we're segregating again. And so then we look at another more recent issue, all this garbage with gender confusion. Now, I get that there's a wide variety and a bunch of nuances with this, but what it comes down to is it's being accepted as normal when previously it was considered a mental disorder. So why is a mental disorder becoming normal? Well, we could go into that for hours on pedophilia and all this garbage that's going under this umbrella of the letters, but what it comes down to is the decline of our society and the absolute 180 from scripture and from God. And then right there at the bottom, we have the school board meetings where our federal investigators, our federal police, are coming after parents for saying, we don't want you guys teaching this radical garbage to our kids. This has no place in school. So we're seeing in a bunch of theories developed by these supposedly highly educated people all culminating in this decline of our educational system. So the next slide, we have um, I believe it's a political style cartoon where it shows our kids before they enter the education system. And well, it's no longer an education system because it says at the top there, when your education limits your imagination, it's called indoctrination. So these kids are no longer being taught how to think, they're being taught what to think. And so they come out of this education system soured towards religion, they're soured towards their family, they're soured towards the country, and they're just miserable, miserable people. So I I've sat for hours driving thinking, what happened? Why is it that our society has gone so far, has collapsed so much that this is what our educational system has become? So I decided to go back to the origin, the best instruction books. So on the next slide, we're going to look at biblical education. So we're going to start with Luke 2:52. And this is very familiar to all of us. And it says, and Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. So early education for Jesus was done at home. In fact, we've seen studies come out of, I believe it was Norway, where they don't have their kids go to a formal education until they're like 7 or 8 years old, because the formative years need to be spent at home with the parents, learning the parents' values system. And in fact, Jesus didn't go to formal education until he was 12 at the synagogue. So if we're going to go and do a Christian education, we really should be looking at the biblical example. And this is where it's going to get the most controversial, is because I know we do have a church school system, and it definitely has its merits, especially in an economy where oftentimes to make one household work, both parents have to go to work. So there is a benefit there, but I'm also a firm believer in kids shouldn't be stuck in institutional learning until at least 8 years old. Even the Catholic Church, there was I believe, a priest that said, give me a child until he is 7, and I'll give you a Catholic for life. So we need to really think about our education of our young people. Now, fortunately, as Pathfinders, this is about the age that we're working with. The 10 to 12 is about when they get started. So we're not, thankfully, Pathfinders is not going against the biblical model, and even Adventurers isn't, because the Adventurer program, even though there's a director, a deputy, and staff, it is a family oriented program. It is meant for mom and dad to be a part of. In fact, when my kids were adventurers, I was a part of it. And when investiture came by, uh, my wife didn't want the pin, but the parents' pin came to me and got put on my uniform. And so I actually, if you ever want to come up and look at my uniform, I still have my adventurer parent pins on my pocket, because I'm a proud parent of my kids, and I still wear those pins with pride at the accomplishments of my kids. So we have, with this Adventure and Pathfinder program, we have followed the biblical model of keeping the parents heavily involved, in fact, the primary, until they're of age to start developing on their own and learning on their own. while Jesus was young, he learned a trade from his parents. His dad taught him how to be a carpenter. His mom taught him how to take care of things around the house. I'm sure she taught him how to cook. All these life skills that a person needed was taught within those first 12 years of Jesus's life. And we look at Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child in the way he should go. And when he is old, he will not depart from it. Now, that doesn't mean that when they're teenagers and they're questioning everything and they're kind of going off on their own and being wild and crazy, it doesn't mean that you have failed as a parent because your kids have gone off the deep end. But there are situations where kids grow up in the church and then they leave for a while, but then they come back. There's a gal I know of specifically who I believe she still attends Muskegon. She grew up in the church. In fact, found out later by coincidence that when the Muskegon Club started up a couple decades ago, actually now, they had my dad as an area coordinator come in and witness their induction service and the startup of their club. And I went with my dad to that induction service, and so I was sitting in the audience, and she was one of the pathfinders up there getting inducted into the program. And I didn't know who she was. I didn't know her from Adam. And later on, my daughter met her son, and they became really good friends. And then her daughter came by and became friends with our daughter and our son. We've actually become family friends, and that's because after years and years out of the church, what was planted as a seed inside of her when she was young grew and finally broke through, and she came back to the church. So there are many examples you can see of young people that, even though they may have left, do eventually come back because of parental involvement. But when we take kids out of the home and put them in school for 7, 8 hours a day, we limit the amount of training the parents have. And now we put it into the hands of these educators that are following these educational theories that mess up our kids. And now we have a bunch of gender confused, blue and pink haired crazies running around screaming at the sky for we're not sure what reason. So we really need to reevaluate the educational system we have. And as Pathfinders, we need to think about how we're educating our young people. So the next slide, we have our biblical education in practice. Now, this is one of the reasons why I am so in favor of the Pathfinder program. And even though my kids are technically out of it now, I'm still going because I still believe not only in the Pathfinder program, but I believe in the way the Pathfinder program teaches young people. So in our Pathfinder program, we read the scriptures. We have the classwork that we go through where we have Bible readings, we have Bible memorization, we have practical application of religion and faith in their lives. And I wanted to really specify the difference between religion and faith. Religion is just an organization of beliefs. Faith is a personal thing that whatever religion it is, you personally take on those beliefs. That's faith. And so we're trying to teach these young people to develop their own faith and to make decisions on their own beliefs. And so as Pathfinders, we encourage them to read the scriptures. We encourage them to apply the scriptures to their lives. Now we have the next one, touching grass. Now that's a fairly, well, it's a new phrase to me. It might be a little older. I'm kind of out of the loop. As you can tell, I was using words. The last seminar about what the kids are saying these days and the weirdness that they use. But touching grass is essentially getting back out into nature. We have all kinds of nature honors. We have um, all kinds of practical skills honors that we can teach, and getting these kids outside away from the screens. And we're told that nature is God's first book. Well, the church teaches second book, but I'm going to promise you it was the first book, because one, he made everything in nature at the beginning. The Bible didn't show up until years and years and years later. So I say that nature is God's first book, and that was the book that Adam and Eve had to learn from. So the best place for our young people to be learning is out in nature. So granted, winter doesn't make that super conducive, but how many times do we have pathfinders outside, even at meetings at the church, where we just need to get them out, let them run, and we keep our meetings down to a minimum. We go down to learning usable skills. We have so many honors that can introduce young people to different hobbies and trades. I know, like I mentioned before, I learned how to weld in Pathfinders. I was able to take that into the workforce, and I was a welder for a number of years. A lot of people, there's auto mechanics and auto mechanics advanced, where you're taking engines apart and you're rebuilding them and running them and doing tune-ups, and you're actually getting a good hands-on experience and skill, to where even if you don't go become a mechanic, you can then use those skills on your own car and save yourself a bunch of money. Or if you get stranded on the side of the road with a flat tire, you're not really stranded because you know how to deal with it. So we also in Pathfinders develop personnel skills, not personal skills, personnel skills through outreach. So we teach these kids how to not only witness and minister, but just how to interact. We go to all these Pathfinder events and we teach. They get their group, their Pathfinder family with their club, but then there's other Pathfinders from other areas that will then become friends with, and these, like we had talked about before, there is an endless supply, seemingly, of good people to good kids that get together, become lifelong friends, and some of us even get married after meeting through Pathfinders. So, developing those personnel skills are actually a very important aspect of the Pathfinder program. Also, learning to work together as a unit. So, like march and drill, the drum corps, and like the field events at the fair, learning to work together as a unit for the betterment of the group. And so these are incredible skills that they're developing. And they're also learning communication skills to be able to work together as a group, to be able to meet new people, and to be able to witness. And thankfully, this is all starting around the age of 10 to 12, so that we've given them opportunity to learn with their parents and be nurtured by their parents. And now they're starting to branch out on their own, and we're providing them a very safe way to develop their independence and to become productive, independent members of society. And this is going to be our one of our shortest seminars today. So, do we have any questions?
Nobody? Nobody wants to go live. Okay. They all say thank you, Matt.
Okay. All right. So we will come back. Let's try to come back in about 10 minutes. So at 11:21, and then we'll get into our last seminar, and hopefully I can get us out by 12:30 and we can finish out our day. right, welcome back. We're going to do our last little seminar here, and hopefully I can get us out by 12:30, somewhere in that vicinity. So we're going to start on resources for creative instruction. Now, this one seems like it's going to be kind of easy, but we'll break into some resources you may not think about and some techniques you may be not thinking about. So, our first slide, we're going to have information is at our fingertips. Now, as far as creative resources, we have easy access to the internet. I mean, it's a constant thing in our pocket, so we could just pull it out and look up something on the internet. Um, there's a lot of benefits, a lot of good to having such easy access to so much information. But we also know that with that easy access to a plethora of information, there is a lot of bad that comes with that. So thankfully, a lot of search engines will have what's called a safe search option. So I would always make sure that safe search is turned on. That tends to filter out a majority of the bad, but people are nefarious. They do things that they try to hide the bad in and amongst the good so that it can still get out. So it's something that we have to be very attentive to. Um, Something I always said, that because technology has pretty much left me behind, that I was born in the wrong generation. And I believed that for quite a while until I'd seen a saying, someone had presented a saying that was, I used to think I was born in the wrong generation, but I'm actually born in the correct generation to uh, keep to keep up with the old traditions. So that's where we go into our next slide. There's no school like the old school. Yes, there's lots of resources online, there's websites, there's Google, all kinds of things that we can go to and research and do. But we also still have a lot of good resources that we used back in the day, like a library. In fact, my wife and I stopped in um, a town way out east near Youngstown, Ohio, and they had this really cool, elaborate library that actually used to be a dormitory for a sanitarium out there. So we stopped and got to tour the building and look around. There was a lot of cool architecture out there. But libraries are still very much alive and well, and they have great resources. Another thing that we used to use back in the day is encyclopedias. Now, you're going to be very hard pressed anymore these days to find a set of encyclopedias on anybody's shelf, including mine. I don't even have a set of encyclopedias, but they were a great resource, and they're still there at the libraries. They have pictures and they have all kinds of information. And sometimes it's kind of fun to go into the older books and see what was modern information at the time. I actually have a world atlas that was, I believe it's copyrighted in 1942 or 43. And in the front, there's a couple of pages that have flags of the world's nations. And the flag for Germany is the Nazi German flag in my book that's on my shelf. So that's actually a really cool way to get some history and show the kids this is not just a story we're telling you. This was real back in a time that wasn't that far from where we are now. So I can actually open my atlas and show kids and show anybody that back when this book was made, that was the German flag, the official German flag. So it's kind of a cool little look into the past. There's dictionaries. Every home should have a dictionary. I know we have our phones and we can look up the meaning of a word on our phone, but the problem with looking it up on our phone is, especially if you go to certain websites that can be changed, you're going to have people changing the meanings of words. And you guys know how I feel about the original meanings of words and talking eloquently and clearly and being able to use our vocabularies. So I think that a good old fashioned dictionary should be on every shelf or on every bookshelf in every home in America. Also, a thesaurus. That's something I'd never really used much as a kid. So I'm not exactly sure how to use it or what to use it for. I'm sure my wife would know exactly how to use it. She's the one that loves writing in English and all that. But I think I have a sufficient enough grasp of the English language that I've never actually used a thesaurus. Now, making a slight turn into the religious aspect, there's a concordance. I know we've used that a lot in Sabbath school classes when I was a kid, um, but looking into the concordance. Also, looking into dictionaries from other languages. So when we're reading through the Bible and we see a word that, like we had shown pride yesterday, pride had different words in the Hebrew than that all translate to the same word in English. Another word I found was in the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not kill. When you look up the word kill, it actually means murder. So when they're trying to say that, oh, when you're out hunting a deer or something, you're murdering that animal and you're killing it and you're breaking one of the commandments. Well, no, because murder, by definition, is um, the intentional killing of a human being. So it's not murder to go out and kill a deer for sustenance. Now, there's definitely ethical ways to hunt, but we're not here to discuss that. What we are here to say is there is nothing wrong with going old school with some of your teaching techniques. Coloring pages are huge um, resource to be able to keep your kids' attention, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But when we have all else fails and we really want our kids to really get out and experience and learn the best, we take them out to nature. We take them outside. Like we just discussed, touching grass. There's research about what's called grounding when you're walking barefoot in the grass. Something about free radicals, electrons, and magnets. I don't understand it. Something my wife understands it. I have no idea. In fact, I don't think I've walked on the grass in a little over a year barefoot. So probably something she's going to make me go do yet this spring. But all right, we'll go to the next slide there. So now something we have to take into consideration when we are teaching our young people, even with the old school methods, is learning types. Um, uh, the first thing we need to consider in learning types is age, the age of our young people. Are they, 10, 11 years old in fifth grade and have an extremely short attention span? Are they adults that we can sit for, a half hour, 45 minutes per seminar and still get up and be able to pay attention and, ask good questions? So we have to really consider the age of our young people and our audience in general. And then we actually have to look at the reality of the differences between boys and girls. Girls tend to be um, better at sitting and listening and being a part of, like today, a sermon or a seminar, sorry, not a sermon, but they tend to do better in school classroom situations. Boys are for a lack of a better term, feral. They like to just run around, go crazy. You know, just yesterday, my son and his two friends from school, they were outside driving around on the lawnmower, pulling each other around on the sled, sliding through the dirt and just making a muddy, nasty mess of themselves. And they had a great time doing it. So they, boys are, they have a way different learning type and a learning curve. And a lot of boys are labeled with ADD or ADHD, and really they're just being boys that need to get out and run off their energy. Another thing we have to consider is learning disabilities. Some may have, like my brother has autism. That was something that had to be taken into consideration when working with him. And there's a plethora of other learning disabilities, and I know ADD and HD are legitimate disabilities. There's also dyslexia and other disabilities that definitely have to be considered when we're working with young people, especially young people that within our Pathfinder Club, because we don't have any restrictions like in a school where you have to have a certain cognitive ability to be in a normal school. Otherwise, you get put into a program such as, like here in Hillsdale, there's the intermediate school district, which caters more towards those with special needs. But Pathfinders, there isn't a thing like that. There is no special needs Pathfinders. So we as Pathfinder leaders, we get to, frankly, I think it's a huge blessing to be able to work with a wide variety of kids and needs and concerns, disabilities, whatever. It's kind of a beautiful thing to be able to work with our young people, and it gives our young people an experience to them working with and becoming friends with the kids with learning disabilities and special needs, and how to interact and be kind and compassionate. So I think it's actually a great thing for our Pathfinders to be able to work together and help each other. Now, there's the three different actual learning types that you can look up and research. That's the visual learning type, the ones that like to see it. I tend to be a little more visual than auditory. I couldn't sit and listen to a book or listen to someone talk and really get much out of it. But in fact, it's not a very large number of people that can. So when we were talking about this seminar and this class, my concept was to have both visual and auditory. Obviously, I'm talking and relaying information, but by putting it up on the screen, I'm able to give you guys some sort of visual aid to learning. And so I'm able to reach more people within their own learning types. And then there's tactile. That's hands-on, okay? That's the way I learn the best. So I learned how to fix a furnace because our furnace went out, and it was a Saturday morning, I think, and it was really cold. So my wife and I sat in the laundry room by the furnace, and she looked up on YouTube our exact make and model, and we looked and found the light and how many times it was flashing, and found the code and figured out how to fix it, and watched a video on it, and I just did it because I had to learn how to fix my own furnace. So I've had my own furnace apart a couple of times, and I've learned how to fix a furnace. I had to tear apart a dishwasher, and I found out how a dishwasher works. My wife's washer and dryer broke, so I had to fix that, and I learned how to fix washers and dryers because I was thrown into it, and I had to learn hands-on. So, and there's guys tend to be more tactile in their learning style. I'm not saying that's a general rule. I'm just saying, generally speaking, some guys tend to learn best with a hands-on strategy. So when we look at these different learning types, we're going to have to look at different tricks of the trade, if you will. So on our next slide, we're going to be talking about teaching tricks. So for a lot of people, whether they be hands on or auditory or visual learners, a lot of times they need something for their hands to do. Now, I've seen this in a couple of different churches where they're adults listening to the sermon while drawing on a scratch piece of paper on the back of the bulletin, or they're coloring with their kids on the quiet bags, or they're doing something with their hands, with the pipe cleaners or something, where if their hands are busy, it's easier for them to learn. Kids are that way a lot. So I know it was Shanetta had called me at one point and asked for some ideas on how to teach some of the Adventist history or heritage to her. I think she's working with friend age class, so the 10 and 11-year olds. So she was trying to figure out how to make this topic exciting for the kids. So we talked about it for probably an hour, and I was in Chicago and my truck was being worked on. So I had time to talk easily. And so she came up with a couple of videos that they could watch, and she printed off a couple of coloring pages that correlated with the topic they were talking about. And so while they were coloring, she could be talking and they could be learning. And so if you've got something going on where you need young ones to be able to sit for a little bit longer, sometimes giving them something to do with their hands helps them listen and glean more from what you're presenting. Another thing is frequent breaks. I try not to go more than an hour for us as adults, because not only do I need a break from talking, but you guys need a break from sitting and listening and going through the same topic. So you want to do frequent breaks. And with kids, it's extremely important to take frequent breaks. Let them get up, let them move, redirect them. And a way to do that is by setting timers. Say, okay, we need to focus on this one thing for 10 minutes. So you set a timer and say, when this goes off, we can then change to this next thing. And so whether it be a break, whether it be just a different part of the book, just something to break up the monotony of just one task. So setting timers can be a huge motivator. We homeschooled our kids for the majority of their school life. They didn't go, my son started his freshman year this year. It was his first year in school. And my daughter started this year and it's her junior year. So we've had a lot of time with them, teaching them at home. One of the best techniques we've used for my son was setting a timer, saying, hey, you need to work on this topic for 30 minutes. Here's the timer, get it started, work on it. We're not saying you have to finish a certain amount of stuff. We say 30 minutes is what you have to work on it, and you need to be diligently working on it. And that tends to work better for him. So you also have to learn to learn your kids, how they learn the best and what tricks and techniques work best for them. Stories are huge, especially with younger kids. If you can take a concept and turn it into a story, they're going to remember it. I mean, we do children's stories at church to they're going to remember the story about how the cat went flying through the air after it got catapulted in a tree. They're going to think it's funny, but they're also going to remember, tied to that story was the object lesson, was the moral behind the story. And there's one particular episode of the Andy Griffith Show where Andy was talking with a bunch of the boys, Opie and his friends, and they were talking about history and how important it was. And the boys kind of got this idea from Andy that history wasn't that big of a deal. Well, then the teacher came by, talked to Andy, said, hey, this is what they were telling me. You told them. This isn't cool. You can't be undermining me as the teacher. So he apologized and he called the boys in to talk to him. And instead of reprimanding them, telling them they need to be better about school and all this, he's like, hey guys, I'm going to just tell you a story. So he told them in very colorful language and with great cool details about this gun that was so loud it was a shot heard around the world. And now we know the story. Now that I say that, the story he was trying to get to them was Paul Revere and the ride and the shot heard around the world that started the Revolutionary War. But he made it into a story, and these boys were totally entranced into this story. And by the time he got done with the story, they're like, "Oh, come on, tell us more. Tell us another story." He's like, "Why don't you go read it?" I'm like, "Where are we going to read this story?" He's like, "In your history book." And they're like, there's no way that this is in our history book in school." He's like, "Well, read it." So they ended up creating this fun little, what they called the Mayberry Minutemen, always ready with the answers for school. So the boys actually really took to history because instead of just sitting there reading it in a book or listening to some adult just drone on with useless information, he turned it into a story and got these kids hooked on the story in the history book. Another thing we use as a teaching technique is visual aids. And I'm talking not just videos and PowerPoint presentations, but when you have props, the one below that, when you're talking about the Revolutionary War and you're talking about how they had these muskets and a muzzle load. Now I know schools you're not allowed to do this, but one of the things that could be done is you could bring in a Kentucky long rifle and teach them what a muzzle load is and how you take a shot. Now you have to pour the powder and put the wadding in and press the ball in and ram it down, and then you can load your cap on the end, and the whole process of a muzzle load and why these wars were fought the way they were. Or you could bring in like you see on the screen there, a big engine. And for the auto mechanics uh, portion of the honor, you can have a big engine sitting on a stand, and they can look at it and you can say, okay, well, this is this part, this, and tear it apart, show them how the functioning parts work and move and what turns what, give them the actual visual aid. The props can be huge in a learning experience. Um, you want to engage as many of the senses as possible. We all know how memory works. You could be walking down a path and you see a certain telephone pole or something, and it strikes a memory because you were walking by that path when this, for the guys, a really pretty girl walked by at that particular moment, and you remember that spot in the path because there's a telephone pole. Or for me, there's actually a section of highway that is southbound 196. Yeah, southbound 196, where I had a certain conversation with my wife, and it was a very meaningful conversation. We were dating at the time, but I was southbound heading for South Haven. And there's that stretch of the highway with like 3 radio towers, and just that one stretch of the highway. There's a lot of memories there because of the conversation I had with my wife. Or you could be eating one of your favorite meals and the smell of it reminds you of grandma's house, or the taste of a food reminds you of your mom's home cooking. Or so many memories can be triggered by senses that we didn't really think to have. So let's go back to auto mechanics. Okay, we've been teaching these kids about the cars and stuff, but because we were in a shop working on the vehicle, they could smell the oil. They could smell the difference between good transmission fluid and burnt transmission fluid. They could, they had the tools in their hand, so the cold steel in their hand is something they're going to remember. And when they smell gasoline, they're going to remember the fuel lines and all the different aspects of smells, sights, sounds. When you fire up that engine and it's roaring, and they realize that it sounds different because you put a racing cam in it, and just so many different things you can do to incorporate as many senses as possible will increase their ability to retain and remember what they have learned. And it also makes it so much easier for them to stay focused if you're engaging more and more of their senses. Um, but you got to be careful of a sensory overload. There are some kids that they get to a certain point and they just shut down because there's just so much going on. So you do gotta know your kids and what you're dealing with. You need to encourage your kids to ask questions. Now, there's the saying of there's no such thing as a stupid question. I don't like to use that because people like Brandon will come up with a random off the wall question that has absolutely nothing to do with anything, and it's meant to throw you off. He and I like to do that when we're driving and on the phone with each other. Mostly happens to him because I'm in his ear and he interacts with customers a lot more than I do. So he'll be talking to customers and I'll be in his ear and he'll be rattling off numbers and I'll just start throwing random numbers in at him. So just to kind of throw him off and mess with him. So that is one way that you could get some stupid questions is if you got a smart aleck like Brandon or myself that's going to come up with some questions that they're stupid questions. But you do need to encourage them to ask questions and provide them with a safe environment to ask questions and to feel like they're not going to be ridiculed for asking those questions because I know I'm a kind of a quiet person. Surprise, surprise, I'm up front. I tend to be a quiet person. So if I have a question, I'm not quick to ask it. I'll kind of wait and let someone else ask the question, and then I'll learn from that answer. So encouraging questions is a huge part of learning. And if they ask the question, one, it indicates interest in the topic. And two, they're going to learn more because you're answering their question directly and they're not going to be made feel a fool for asking the question. And sometimes just saying, hey, great question, thank you for that, is huge encouragement for them and other people to ask questions. Um, Allow mistakes. Mistakes is the best way to learn. Doing it the right way, yeah, that's nice. That's a good way to do it that you can learn. But if you make a mistake and then you have to fix it, you're really learning. That is the best way to really ingrain into your memory the best way or the right way to do something. Now, obviously, there are some mistakes you don't want them to make that could be harmful to themselves or to the machinery or to other pathfinders. You don't want them getting hurt, but there are some mistakes you just got to let them make. Um, my my son and his buddies were driving the lawnmower around the yard and they found a soft spot and they got stuck. So instead of me going out there and saying, "Hey guys, you need to be careful. There's a lot of soggy spots and there's a lot of water left and there's the ground is made out of mostly clay," and no, just let them go, let them run, let them learn. And they got the tractor stuck and then they had to work together to figure out how to get it unstuck. And so they not only learned not to drive through low spots when it's wet and soggy and to check the ground before they drive there, but they also learned how to pull a stuck vehicle out and to work together. And sometimes you just got to allow them to learn by making a mistake. And the biggest thing you can do as a teacher to encourage learning, the biggest, the most helpful resource is patience. Being patient with our young people, allowing them to learn, allowing them to make mistakes, allowing them to ask all the questions they want to ask, allowing them to touch the engine with the exception of when it's running. You really don't want them touching a lot of components. But hey, if it's running, teach them how to find the throttle and move the throttle by hand or um, just be patient with them, be kind, look at your like we talked about yesterday, the fruits of the spirit. patience, kindness, long suffering. Let these kids learn, give them a safe place to learn, and watch them flourish, watch them grow. And when you look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs from yesterday, it's that same thing. Once they feel comfortable, once their needs are met, and they're given a spot to learn and grow, watch them go. They're going to blow your mind. All right, so do we have any questions on this topic?
All right, we have a couple questions, Matt.
Hello, Matt. So going back to, you going back to the slide thing or no? I think it was like that second one was talking about the learning types
Okay, learning types.
before that one. Before that one.
Slide number 4, Brandon.
No, it was one of like the first or second one maybe, sorry.
Okay. Information at our fingertips,
It was before that
or
one.
before that one's the start of it. Anyways, what was your question?
Well, it was about, yes, the learning disabilities and
Okay.
could be also learning abilities. So I don't know which, oh yeah, okay, so it is in there. Sorry, I didn't see it.
Yeah.
The learning type. So when we have pathfinders that fall into different criteria for learning disabilities and obviously abilities and their learning styles of learning, how can, I mean, you have expressed in different formats of how to modify these teaching techniques or philosophies in our classes, but has the organization, Pathfinders, tried to, let's say, modify the requirements for some, let's say, classes for some of these learning disabilities? For example, in a, let's say, public school system, they have independent education plans and 504s for students that have learning disabilities. Like you expressed, that was before your time, my time, that didn't exist in the previous generation, but and they have different, let's say, limits of, let's say, surpassing the academics or whatever requirements to meet that goal for their grade level or whatever. So can that be, let's say, percented in a, let's say, AY class or honor class, whatever? Because obviously there's always the advanced, the stars, you know, to get
Right.
overachievers, the
Right, like me.
120% student that get the A plus, you know. The ones that graduated GPA 4.3, believe me, I had a couple of those in my graduating class.
Right.
4.3 GPA, I don't know how that can happen. But there's always the overachievers, but for the ones that are, for some degree, difficult, like let's say just even the simple example of writing. Writing, for some, is very difficult for them to write, and most of the things you have to write answers and stuff like that. So so it's not really part of the what you were talking about, but I am really, I guess this is a personal aspect for me because I have a son that falls in that criteria. So it's like there's no IEPs in Pathfinders, I know, and it's like, how can you still, I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yes, I do. And the beauty of Pathfinders is we operate on a 10-month program. So what you could consider a normal kid can complete in 2 or 3 months could take, a kid with special needs, the full 10 months. And when you have classes, they tend to be smaller groups. I know I've taught up to, I think it was 5 kids in one class, but it also gave me the ability as the instructor to learn my students and learn what they need. And sometimes you just have to flat out say, like, when I'm taking a group of Pathfinders somewhere, I say, all right, we're going to stay together as a group and we're going to go as fast as the slowest person. And they always like to say, well, who's the slowest person? And I'm never going to throw anybody under the bus. So I always say, I am the slowest person and you're going to stay with me. Meanwhile, I'm paying attention to the whole club and I know actually who is the slowest person, and I am matching the slowest person's pace, and everyone has to stay with me. So sometimes you can slow everybody down a little bit and everybody work together. Sometimes you can have other students help the student with special needs, where, like when I'm teaching the knot honor, I will always have 2 or 3 Pathfinders who get it and get it right away, and others that just struggle and struggle and struggle. So those that get it right away, I have them go and help those that are struggling, because that helps in 2 ways. One, it helps the person who is struggling to have more one-on-one teaching and tutoring. But secondly, the best way to memorize and learn something is to teach it. So these kids that are teaching it are not only learning how to help out others, but they're also learning the curriculum and the materials that much better because they have to now teach it. Another thing you could do is not hold everybody to the advanced class. Okay, for like I don't believe that the conference has a curriculum adaptation for those with special needs. I personally think that the current curriculum is it's not super taxing as far as a lot of the reading and the writing. And sometimes you have those that have trouble with writing. You sit down, you have a one-on-one, because I know we have a kid who in Hillsdale has, I think he's ADHD and autistic, and I think 2 other things. I mean, he really has some major trouble with focusing. So when there's an event where he has to sit down and write, I sit down right next to him while the teacher's up front teaching and going through all the information. I'm sitting right next to him, showing him word for word what he has to write, what he has to do, keeping his focus, keeping his attention. Sometimes that's what you need to do, is have a personal one-on-one aid for that young person that is having difficulties. Now, I know there's some clubs where you have a staff to child, what is it called, ratio of like 5 students to 1 staff, or like I want to say PMC is something like 10 or 15 students to 1 staff member, something like that, where there are some extenuating circumstances where it's hard to put a one-on-one. But again, that's where you can know your kids and say, okay, we have one that's really excelling, they rip through it, okay, have them sit next to the kid that's the slowest, and they can help work the slower kid along. um, I don't want to offend anybody by calling kids with disabilities slow. I'm just referring to the amount of time that it takes for them to complete a task. um, to have a Pathfinder program, I don't want to say that it's simplified or dumbed down, but it's definitely geared towards kids to take the learning experience at their own pace, especially as like the classwork. There is some writing to do, and the honors, there's quite a bit of writing to do on some of the honors. So maybe you don't choose that honor, or you give them the information, and then when it's time for them to write down, you have a 1 or 2 sentence thing that you give them word for word to write down. There's different ways of working with the people who have learning disabilities, but still being able to stay with the current Pathfinder curriculum.
Awesome. Yep, that answers my question.
Perfect.
We have another question here.
Okay.
We have a couple questions about the camping skills weekend.
Okay.
Did we decide for that June 7?
That's something where if we have anybody that needs any camping skills before the camporee, I'm willing to come up and work with someone on the Sabbath afternoon to get some of those skills done. But something that we've kind of discovered is most people working within their clubs will have gotten the camping skills honors.
It was
So
mostly
if
about
they're
like all the after education stuff after we're done. So we can clarify at the end of the meeting that after next month with the CPR, that the meetings for the actual Master Guide Club in person are done.
right. So if anybody needs
Everything
further
after
help
that
with
is
camping
looking at
skills,
something different. So
yep, I'm more than happy to come up and help anybody with certain camping skills requirements. But it's not something where we're going to do a full weekend like we originally had planned to. That and it was way too close to camp meeting to really pull off a full weekend. I think it's a lot on everybody.
I can tell you about that afterwards. Does anybody else have anything for the seminar here? Okay.
Any
think that
questions on
was-
any of the seminars done so far over the weekend?
I think that was it. I think they had a couple questions that we can get answered over here, but other
Okay.
than that, I think we're good on this end.
All right, so we're going to cut this off, and if anybody needs stuff signed off, Brandon can sign that off for you. And I believe that you are able to choose who you want to have invest you at the World Camporee. We're going to double check that with Pastor Harris because he's going to have a Michigan specific area for those getting their master guide at the World Camporee. So if you have someone
Invest you.
in mind that you want to have invest you at the World Camporee, if it's myself or Brandon or Roseanne or even my wife, just let us know. If you have a master guide that you know from your club or your area coordinator, or if you want Pastor Harris, just let us know so we can coordinate that because it's all going to pretty much happen at the same time. So we'll let us know, and we'll see what we can do to facilitate getting everybody invested by who they choose at that event. All right, so I thank you guys for joining in and for being a part of this. Let's close with a prayer, and you guys are dismissed. And we're 5 minutes after 12? That's not bad. All right, let's bow our heads. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the opportunity to get together as Pathfinder staff to learn the best way to take care of and to teach your young people, your precious children that you've blessed us with. We pray now that you be with us as we travel to our homes and start our next week. Keep us safe and bring us all back together next Sabbath to enjoy another day of rest. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Goodbye, everybody.